Hi everyone, it's Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to be making a card with the dressing screen die set from the Stamps of Life. I'm also going to be incorporating some other stamp sets into this card. So starting off, here is the die set. It is a very large die set. It's actually about 11 and an eighth inch wide, and it's 6 and an eighth inch tall, and it has all these beautiful scallops at the top, and you can see the little legs at the bottom of the die. And it also has this flourish, and there's some other layering dies that you can use on the different panels in this die set. You can see it has some smaller rectangle dies. You could probably also use those on other cards in addition to this particular one. This particular die actually has the little design at the bottom. So if you wanted to have the layering dies with the little design at the bottom, you can do that. There's also some banner dies you can use for sentiments on your cards. So there's a lot of options with this die set, and you can see how large this die is. This is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock, and it just barely fits. So when I actually run this through my die cut machine, it's actually going to cut a little bit off the side because the paper that I'm using is not large enough to fit the entire width of this die. You can see that it's a little bit of straight edge at the side. You can see it's not as curved because the die didn't come all the way to the edge of my cardstock. But it's not really a big deal. It's just on the edge. You really can't notice, and anyone that you're giving this card to wouldn't be able to notice either. So just fold along the score lines and you'll get the 4 panels as you saw here. And then I'm using this layering die that came with this set. Die cut some kiwi cardstock, and then the next size layering die I have some white cardstock. So I'm bringing in the Thanks to You stamp set, which has these flowers. I'm also bringing in the Pixie and the Kiwi ink from the Stamps of Life, and I'm just going to stamp these flower images onto these white panels because I don't need to get the entire stem on that panel. I'm just using a smaller acrylic block. So I ink that up, and I'm just wiping off the stem because I want to actually do the stem in the kiwi ink. So the top part of the flower is in the Pixie ink, and then the stem is in the kiwi ink. And then I'm just going to stamp that down onto the white cardstock, and it gives me a 2-color look because I use the 2 stamps. And then I'm going to bring in another flower stamp. This one does not have the stem, so I'm just going to stamp it on the edge of that panel. And then I'm going to take my next panel and I'm just going to do the same thing, although I am going to position the stamp in obviously a different place on that panel. I don't want to have the same exact design. Here I just use some washi tape just to mask off the stem, and then I'm going to come back in with my kiwi ink and just ink up the stem in a different color. So some of these flower images will be on the top of the panel, some will be towards the bottom of the panel, some will be cut off on the side. So any design that you want to go with would be perfectly fine. So basically just making kind of like some pattern paper using stamping. So your own pattern paper using stamping on these panels. So here are the completed panels. You can see that all of them have a slightly different design. And now I'm just taking the butterfly from the Bird Bath to Stamp set and inking it up with some candy ink and stamping the butterfly in random spots on each of the panels. Next, I'm going to do some heat embossing. I'm just taking my powder tool and rubbing it over the panel, and I'm going to use a pretty large stamp. This is a stamp from the Life Too Hard stamp set. I'm going to ink it up with some Versamark ink and stamp it on to one of the panels. Now, before you do this, I do suggest that you make sure that the ink from the flower and the butterfly is completely dry before doing this. Otherwise, when you sprinkle your embossing powder over top of this, the embossing powder may stick to the pink and the green and that Pixie ink, because I tried it initially when I did not dry the panel and it did stick. So just keep that in mind if you're replicating this technique. Just use a heat tool and dry it just to make sure it's completely dry before sprinkling this embossing powder over top. This is just a gold embossing powder, so I sprinkled that on top, and then I'm going to pour the excess in the jar. And then after I do that, I will heat set it. So I'll use my heat tool just to melt that embossing powder. And after looking at this stamp, I feel like that the stamp was kind of off balance. It was too far to the right, so I went ahead and re-stamped it to make it a little bit more centered. And then I'm taking another sentiment in the same Life Too Hard stamp set, and this one says Trust God. Since the sentiment was on one line, I just cut down the middle in the stamp, and it's okay if you cut your stamps, no big deal, it's not going to hurt it, because I wanted to make it on 2 lines. So again, I'm just using my powder tool just to run some powder over top of the cardstock panel, stamped it in the Versamark ink, and then I'm stamping it on the panel. Then I'm going to sprinkle some more gold embossing powder right over top of the sentiment, and then I'll heat set that to melt the embossing. And then I'm going to take each one of these panels and I'm just going to ink up the edges and put some ginger snap ink along the edges of all of these panels. And then I'll glue each of those panels down to the kiwi panel, which is slightly larger in size. And then I will take some of my silver little gems, and I'll just put a few of the silver gems on each one of those panels. And then I'm going to take each one of those panels and I'll attach them to each of the 4 sections of the card base. Now I've only decorated the front of this card, but if you wanted to decorate the back of the card, you most certainly can do that as well. And then I decided to go back in and add a few more silver gems to a few of the panels. And you can see the completed card. And this card again will fold for each of the 4 panels, and it will fold flat for mailing. And if you wanted to stand it up on a table, you can do that as well. Now here I just wanted to see what size envelope this would fit in. So it's slightly larger than an A2 size, and it's quite a bit smaller than a 5x7 envelope. This is a mini slimline envelope and it would fit perfectly inside of that. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you have any comments or questions, leave them down below, and be sure to subscribe for more card making tutorials. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.